Hello and welcome to the new series of Drishti IAS. I am Pooja Dwivedi, and in this segment today we are going to discuss about Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This topic is important from the perspective of prelims and also from the perspective of GS mains papers. Let's begin with the topics that we are going to discuss step by step. These are the many topics that we are going to discuss. It is very important for you to understand the geopolitical as well as economic scenario of it. So geopolitical, if we talk about, it is related to GS paper 2, international relation, GS paper 2 itself. And economic scenario relates to GS paper 3. So be very careful about covering all those points. Many facts and many important concept organizations have been covered. So be very attentive. Now let's move on and know why is it in the news. As the gas and oil prices are on the rise, US in a coordinated and joint effort with India, China, UK, South Korea, Japan, all these countries have come together to join forces when we talk about releasing of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, because the OPEC plus countries have failed to regulate and take under control the price rise of oil, and now we have to look at the rising prices and accordingly we have to release Strategic Petroleum Reserves from our Indian country, of course the country of India, and many other countries have also come into the picture. So that is all we are going to discuss. So as you can see, this news piece, now 50 million barrel of Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it will be released by mid-December this year itself, because as the season of holidays has come, people have started traveling and Thanksgiving is coming. Also December is the festival of Christmas. So in countries which are exclusively dealing with holiday season, dealing with certain conditions of winter, they are of course going to have a devoted approach towards curbing the gas oil prices. Also, this is an artificial way. Of course, the OPEC plus countries are responsible for regulating the price rise of oil. They have failed to do so. International Energy Agency has now, of course, with the help of its own concept of Strategic Petroleum Reserve, is going to help in bringing in line all these countries which are refusing to regulate the oil prices. Okay, so as you can see, 50 million barrel of oil will be released and India will release 5 million. 50 plus 5 will be from India, and Japan and China and UK are also going to release their own specified amount of release, however they are going to release. It can be from the government agencies, the government itself, or private agencies. However, in UK, they are saying the private agencies won't be coerced to do so. It's upon them. Now, if we talk about the price of Brent crude, this has arisen. Now, in May, of course, we know after the COVID-19 pandemic, the prices fell down. The prices did fall down and it was unable to be controlled. As you can see, from January, the demand and supply lag. The darker one is the supply, which remained constant throughout the pandemic. In December, since December 2019, the onset of the pandemic occurred, and as you can see, in April it went so down that there was this gap, and this gap was the loss which was occurred by the which was actually bore by the OPEC countries. Okay, so because of here we see now again the Brent crude oil prices are going really high, and this is because of the economic recovery that every country is now again trying to be back on its feet. It is demanding more energy for the economic purposes, and because of this the demand might be high, supply is not matching. Because the supply is not matching according to the demand, that is why there is a rise in the oil prices. Moving on, if we talk about the OPEC plus countries, the OPEC plus countries means the OPEC countries plus those other countries which are not a part of the OPEC, but they have a significant amount of export of oil. And as you can see, here I have an attached map of the OPEC countries. This is an organization, intergovernmental, international organization. It was established in 1960 at the Baghdad conference. Okay, and it was established by Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, and many other countries became a part of it. It's basically a Saudi-led intergovernmental organization. It is responsible for maintaining the supply of the oil in the world. and it is responsible for 60% of the supply of oil in the world. And any country which matched the ideals of OPEC, it is open to any country which matched the ideals of the OPEC, plus has a significant share in the oil export. And these are the many countries. If you know any more countries, you can comment in the comment segment. So these OPEC plus countries haven't been able to regulate the oil prices because they were not restoring the production. The production was not such so that demand could be met. After it imposed a supply cut of 10 million barrels per day in April 2020. So it has remained the same since then. That's the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, the supply was constant, demand was very low because of the lockdown and the lockdown of the economic activities, demand was not that large. And in USA, gasoline prices right now are at about $3.40. That is a gallon, which is more than 50% higher than a year ago. So of course, whatever the strategic petroleum reserves are there with the US, they are going to release it. And the consumer price index also soared 6.2%. From that means inflation is there from a year ago, and this is the biggest 12-month jump in 1990. Okay, remember all these facts for your answer writing as well. Moving on, if we talk about the other situation in India, that is in Delhi, despite of the cut in excise duty and central excise duty on petrol and diesel, the result which was expected hasn't been so. So in Delhi, petrol is retailing at rupees 104 per litre and diesel at 86.7 per litre. That means the transportation cost, if it increases, it will also increase the prices of the commodities. That means inflation would be there, and up 27% and 21% respectively from a year ago. This is the comparison. And despite a recent move of cutting the central excise duty, it has not resulted in something very constructive. Moving on, if we talk about UK is also scrambling to keep up with the rising oil prices. It is also going to release its strategic petroleum reserve, although it's a net exporter. It exports, and because it has a huge amount of oil, it can export. So what is strategic petroleum reserve? First, let's understand what is it basically. As you can see with the word strategic, that means keeping in line with the stability of the region and having a strategic support. A huge stockpile of crude oil is maintained. It is maintained and it has been increased after the pandemic, because at the time of pandemic, the cost was low. India had a lot of incentive purchasing oil at that low price and keeping up with the filling up its strategic petroleum reserve. And it is there to deal with any crude oil related crisis. So if there is any distortion in the supply chain of crude oil with respect to natural disaster, war, or any sort of calamity, this can be used. And International Energy Program had an agreement in which each International Energy Agency country has an obligation to hold emergency oil reserves. And this was because of the 1973 oil crisis. Okay, this is equivalent to last at least 90 days of net oil import. So in the last 3 years, whatever the net oil import was there, the average 90-day should be maintained of that stockpile. Okay, and only net exporter members of IEA are exempt from this. Remember, whoever are net exporter, because they have huge production capacity, they might not have strategic petroleum reserve, while the rest of the countries can. So these are the many countries including Canada, Mexico, Norway, and also United States. But there is an exemption to Denmark and UK, because when UK was a part of the European Union, it had to maintain its strategic petroleum reserve, and Denmark also did the same. And the UK and Denmark, we have already discussed that, so we shan't. Let's move forward. So this is the manner in which caverns are built underground, and this is how it is maintained. It is basically maintained near sea lines, near the ocean, so that the dispatch and the release of oil can be done with the help of the pipeline, so that it can shipped forward. Ships are very close to the coastline, and that is why it is done. Also, it is very economic in nature. Let's know about the features of it. That it's first history, then features. The concept of dedicated strategic reserve of petroleum was mooted in the US for the first time ever in the year 1973 after the oil crisis. And OPEC oil crisis, of course, we know about the OPEC countries, we have discussed about it. So after this only, there was distortion in the supply chain, and because of that we had to maintain strategic petroleum reserves. Most economical method, because it is stored underground, it is closer to the ocean, so that more transportation cost should not get that high, plus not a large swathe of land is needed. Also, it will not create a lot of hindrance to the biodiversity, and of course it ensures that less evaporation is bound to happen, but less evaporation is there, and we have discussed about this. So let's move forward and let's talk about our scenario. So in India, the strategic petroleum reserves are regulated by Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Limited, which is a special purpose vehicle, and it actually is owned by Oil Industries Limited, which is under the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. So it takes care of the strategic petroleum reserves, and the petroleum reserves are established under phase 1. There were 3. Phase 1 were strategic in nature. Phase 2 are strategic and commercial in nature. Strategic in nature means the government will take any sort of discussion or any sort of decision on how and when to release the strategic petroleum reserve, and that will be used during an oil shortage event. Okay. Then if we talk about the second one, phase 2 one, they are on how they are maintained. First of all, they are established under public-private partnership. Remember that. Phase 2, public-private partnership. Okay, PPP. And as you can see, with the help of this, in phase 1, we had at 3 locations: Visakhapatnam, Mangalore and Padur. Okay, so here is Visakhapatnam, Mangalore and Padur, Andhra Pradesh, and then we have Karnataka. As you can see, it is near the coastal states. We know the reason. And here, if we talk about all of this, it had 5.33 million metric tons of oil reserve. And now the phase 2 is going to be at Chandikol in Odisha, and of course Padur in Karnataka. Okay, so Padur has 2 now. Okay, so remember that all these strategic reserve, first one being 5.33 and second one being 6.5, it will create a huge amount of reserve for India. Reserves should be maintained for at least a net 90-day average according to International Energy Agency. India, being an associate member of International Energy Agency since the year 2017, is working on it. So as you can see, for the first one we have 10 days of reserve, and the second one, when the completion will be done, this year only it was approved, so when the completion will be done, it will increase it to 12 days, and the total will become 22 days. Now there must be a question, this is just 22 days, what about the lagging amount of days that we need? So 65 days of oil reserve is maintained by Indian refineries as well. Remember that, 65 days of Indian refineries. So that becomes 5 plus 2, 7, 6 plus 2, 8. 87 days of oil reserves, strategic petroleum reserves are there. Okay, let's move forward and talk about some important, we have discussed this, so we shall not discuss about this. This is just to make you understand. Okay, let's move forward and talk about SPR in India. What is the need? First of all, global petroleum strategic reserves are very important so that supply demand shock doesn't happen. At the end of the day, it's the people who are going to suffer. So nothing sort of that should happen. First, build sufficient capacity. Capacity should be huge with respect to India, because this is a developing country. Also, after the pandemic, the importance of energy is very thrust upon. Why? Because India has not yet moved to alternative energy sources, and India will not move to alternative energy sources till the next good 10 to 20 years. It will need more time to be robust in its own energy supply with respect to renewable energy or alternative sources of energy. So first is that we need to maintain huge stock, sufficient capacity of strategic petroleum reserve. And energy security, of course, if a country like India, which has huge manpower, skilled and unskilled, if it wants to come back on the economic track, because India does have the potential. So of course, in order to have this criterion fulfilled, we need good amount of strategic petroleum reserve. Moving on, if we talk about the United States, the Japan and China, they are the biggest strategic petroleum reserve countries, because world's largest holder of crude reserve is the US, and these are in a cave, complex of caves. Many caves are there under near the Gulf Coast, and at its maximum inventory, the US reserve held 26.6 million barrels of strategic petroleum reserve. China is the second largest, and it has endeavored to store crude oil. It started very late in 2007, yet it has huge amount of reserve at 475 million barrel. And Japan is the third largest. In 2007 also, Japan announced its plan to share the strategic reserves with other countries, so that other countries can similarly, as right now, other countries can come into the picture and help to move forward from this situation. Now, if we talk about what is expected, this is an artificial and one of the many steps the government will undertake in order to talk about how we will bring down the prices. So, coordinated efforts have already played a role in bringing down the prices from a high $86.4 in late October, this October, to under $80 per barrel. So it is working, but it is not the only option. Why? Because the action is unlikely to immediately. It is not going to show immediately, because of course there is a time lag between the ailment symptom and the cause of it. Similarly, the remedy, whatever we are putting, and the effects of it, impact of it, it will be a time lag. There will be a time lag. And because gasoline usually responds at a lag, as we have talked about. Let's move forward and also talk about this article that Goldman Sachs has said that global oil reserves release is a drop in the ocean. That means even after the joint coordinated approach, only 70 to 80 million barrel of oil will be released. That is just a drop in the ocean. A lot more is needed. The impacts will not be that large. Let's move forward and talk about certain government initiatives that have been undertaken by our government itself. Fiscal incentives to attract investment have been undertaken, and it should be undertaken from the private agencies as well in order to invest in strategic petroleum reserve. And state-run oil firms are planning many investments. Even if we talk about Uttar Pradesh, we have rupees 723 crore in Uttar Pradesh to improve the liquefied petroleum gas. And of course, a natural gas trading exchange has also been maintained for diverting the attention to not only crude oil but also to natural gases. And increase the use of natural gas is aimed by the year 2028 and 2030. Also, there are plans to set up bio CNGs moving forward. Now, as you can see, the gas exchange which was developed this year itself, it's important from the perspective of prelims. This is INX. Do read about it. Okay, you can read about it on the Drishti's website. Let's move forward and talk about the other important initiatives that the government should undertake. It should buy strategic petroleum reserves in other countries and store its oil, so that in case of any calamity, even if in India it happens, it can still have a hold of SPRs. Distribute the oil contracts in several countries in order to avoid the monopoly of any one country, so that we know we should not put all our eggs in one basket. Alternative sources apart from the oil should also be there. Let's move forward and talk about our mains based question. Okay, what is strategic petroleum reserve? Discuss the need of it and also its status in India in 250 words. So that's it for today. Tomorrow we shall meet again with another segment. Until then, stay updated and thank you so much for watching.